Alrighty, beautiful and strong people. Coach Alan here, and today we're going to talk about the foot rooting. Lesson 4 of the squat mastery. Strength begins where you touch the ground, and this is so goddamn true. We tend to think about the squat as just the pushing motion, like, we're just lifting the barbell up, but we forget a lot about the importance of actually having that contact with the ground because, after all, the squat is actually starting from your foot, and any kind of instability you actually feel around your foot will actually be transferred all the way to the barbell. So we want to make sure that the contact with the ground is actually short and it's in the best possible and most stable position. Okay? Because any kind of instability that comes from here is going to spiral upward. So how do we even think about the foot in the first place? Well, there are 3 points of contact that I want you guys to focus on: the heel, base of big toe, and base of pinky toe. Okay, this is your stable foot. You want to think about spreading your feet, and especially if you have shoes that are with wide toe, which I definitely recommend you guys. Whether we're talking about heel shoes or whether we're talking about flat shoes, wide toe are absolutely perfect for this because it really lets your foot open up and it actually lets you root your foot much better than just the regular shoes. So you want to make sure that you're having contact with the ground and you're pressing against the ground with the heel, base of big toe, and base of small toe. Okay, and by doing that, you're quite literally gripping the floor. Okay, you want to spread and push, or spread and push out. That's the way you want to think about rooting the feet. This is going to help you to distribute the pressure evenly. It's going to give you the proprioception about where the load is, whether it's distributed more towards your toes or more towards your heel. Once you're actually rooting your feet, you're automatically getting into that midfoot position that we're actually looking for. So why is the root so important? Because after all, we can talk about how to do it, but if we don't really understand why it's so important, it's going to be really hard to actually put it into practice. Okay, so your feet quite literally dictate the knee and hip movement, because through your feet comes all the strength from your legs all the way up to the barbell. So as I said, you're quite literally thinking about pressing the earth away from you. Okay, you're not squatting, you're actually pressing the earth away from you. So making sure that your core is actually braced, making sure that the lat tension is there to actually keep the bar in position. The rest of it comes at the foot. So if there is instability here, it's going to go all the way from your feet to your knees, to your hips, to your spine, and to the barbell. Okay, so what the foot root really does is it's preventing the knee cave and dancing feet, and it keeps the consistent bar path. So watch how my knee is moving around if I have my feet relaxed. Okay, so I'm not really applying any kind of tension against my feet right now, but watch what happens when I'm trying to do that when I'm rooting my feet. Okay, so right here I'm rooting my feet, and watch how I can barely move my knee. So there is almost no moving of the knee at all, because I've rooted my feet, I've created that stable base, and for my knee to actually move around is a lot harder. So it really helps with the bar path. It really helps with preventing the knee and your foot going all around the place, and it really helps you to actually sustain that straight direction from the midfoot to the barbell. And it also unlocks the quad activation because, again, getting back to the idea that stability is the foundation of strength. In order for any muscle or any joint to actually initiate a movement, it needs stability. It needs the other joints to actually be acting as, let's say, a postural role. Okay, so like holding tension, holding position. So that joint is actually initiating the movement. The same thing applies here. You can't really, make use of, to the maximum, make use of your quads if your feet are not rooted, because you don't have that stable base, you don't have that let's say platform from which your knee joint can actually generate the movement. So this is why it's absolutely foundational to your quad activation. This applies to any kind of quad specific movement in which you're actually having the contact to the ground, excluding the leg extensions. when you're doing leg press, you gotta keep, that foot rooted to the platform. When you're doing Bulgarian split squats or back lunges or just walking lunges, every step has to come with a root. It's, you can't just go through the motion and expect the muscle to do its job. You need to give it stability for it to actually generate force. So we can't really talk about the foot and just foot root in general without actually talking about the footwear choices, because most of the times we're actually squatting in shoes. So it's important to actually understand how the shoe might actually influence your foot root and how that might actually influence your squat in general. Okay, we're going to get a little bit more in depth on that on the individual differences section. But just as a general rule of thumb, the flat shoes will force you into a little bit more of a hip hinge. It's going to force more lean forward of your torso. So in those cases, especially for the people that usually squat with a, let's say, wide stance and low bar, those people usually tend to prefer the flat shoes a little bit more. Now, with the heel shoes, however, or the weightlifting shoes, how they're usually called, you're going to have more of an upright torso. So, you can imagine that weightlifting squat that we're actually talking about. It's really helpful for the people that have long femurs or just have, in general, limited ankle mobility. So for those people, especially that have trouble reaching depth or just have trouble reaching depth without that butt wing, this is really going to be helpful to just give your body a little bit more room to actually get in depth. So how these are going to influence the heel shoes, usually have a harder time to root your feet through your heel, while the flat shoes really allow you a lot more to actually connect with the floor a little bit better. With the heel shoes, you kind of have to make sure that you're not letting the bar go too much forward, because there will be the tendency of actually rolling forward a little bit. So just taking under consideration that and thinking more when you're doing the heel shoes to actually sit down might actually be helpful to mitigate that tendency of actually rolling forward. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more about the footwear when we're going to go in the individual differences, but just as a perspective, based on what you're actually going to wear, is going to influence your foot rooting. And you're going to have an easier time thinking about the foot root with the flat shoes in comparison to the heel shoes. So what I want you guys to do on the next squat session is to try and squat barefoot. But before you're actually doing that, I want you to start to feel the tripod contact. So without load, without anything on your back, just play around with the foot contact. Okay, so thinking about the big toe, the small toe, the heel pressure in there, and try to really connect with that kind of feeling. After that, you can just do some air squats on your own, just knock 2 to 3 sets of 6 repetitions, really slow and controlled to get that kind of feeling. And after that, you can grab the bar and just do a couple of warm-up sets during your workout without shoes, just to get that feeling, to capture that feeling. After that, you can continue your workout with your normal shoes. But what's going to do is going to really allow you to connect with your small toe, big toe, and heel. And it's going to really help you to root your feet harder into your shoes. So a couple of common mistakes that we may potentially see with the foot root is weight being distributed more towards the heel. So if you're focusing a lot more towards the heel, in some cases that might actually be an idea if the bar is actually shifting a little bit more towards the front of the foot. It may potentially be a good idea. But if we have too much pressure on the heel, of course, our toes will actually lift and we may potentially end up falling forward. If the weight is only on our toes, so the opposite is going to happen, the heels will actually elevate and we're going to end up rolling forward. If the arch is actually collapsing inward, we're going to end up in a knee cave. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're also having that pressure on the pinky, on the small toe, not necessarily the pinky. I'm not sure if it's called pinky on toes. I believe not, but you can call it the foot pinky. So if the arch is actually collapsing, our knees will start to actually cave inward. Of course, another common mistake is just shuffling and dancing your feet after the walkout. Once you finish the walkout, you want to root your feet. Once you find that stance and solid position, you want to keep your feet rooted so you can actually go through the descent. It's very important to keep the knee tracking the foot. And that's is going to happen if you're actually applying the foot root properly. So if you're focusing on the big toe, small toe, and heel pressure, your knee will naturally go where the foot is. And this is going to be very important. That's not to say that you need to avoid any kind of knee cave, because a little bit of knee cave under max loads is normal. Okay, so if you see a slight knee cave of your knees, don't worry about it. Don't panic. It's just your body finding a better leverage. However, if your foot collapses, that's where it becomes serious. Because if your foot collapses, all that instability is actually being transferred from your foot to your knee, to your hips, to your spine, to the barbell. And that's when the risk of injury might actually go up. So in summary, your tripod foot is pretty much your foundation of strength. This is where it all starts from. Your feet is going to dictate the knee, hip, and bar path. So making sure that your feet are actually rooted is going to give you a humongous amount of stability. Choosing footwear based on leverages is going to be important. But again, we're going to get a little bit more in depth on that when we're going to get into individual differences. Play around with the barefoot rooting and apply it under load. Grab the barbell and do a couple of sets barefoot, if your gym, of course, allows such a thing. And of course, why not? You can even have a full workout of barefoot training just to actually explore that kind of feeling. And remember, stability comes first. Strength comes second. In order for you to actually express strength, you need the stability component. If you do not have the stability in there, it doesn't really matter how strong you are. You're not going to be able to actually drive that strength in the joints and to the barbell. So always make sure that you are stable with your torso and with your feet so you can actually use all that strength against the barbell. Catch you on the next one.